Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Wednesday, September 15th, 2021 regular town council meeting for the town of Scarborough, Maine. Time for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3 is roll call. Tony?
Councilor Pucci?
Here.
Councilor Anderson?
Here.
Councilor Katarina?
Here.
Councilor Johnson?
Here.
Councilor Hamel?
Here.
And Chairman Johnson.
Here. Item number 4 is general public comments. I see no members of the general public here, so I move along. Item number 5 is approval of the minutes, September 1st, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none. Tony?
Councilor Pucci?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Councilor Katarina?
Yes.
Councilor Johnson?
Yes.
Councilor Hamel?
Yes.
And Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is adjustments to the agenda. There are none. Item number 7 are treasurer's warrants. They have been signed. Item number 8 is the town manager's report. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few items of interest, I think. Just on the COVID front, there really have been no changes. I think I reported last meeting, we have instituted a mask requirement for staff when they're out in the public spaces, common areas. Worth noting, we certainly do have all the protective barriers still in place, so and a very high vaccination rate among staff. But nonetheless, we have that in place, and that will stay in place until we go 2 consecutive days out of the high distinction for Cumberland County. Unfortunately, it's been sustained at that high level for about 10 days now. So we continue to monitor it daily, but staff is certainly, falling right back into that routine and seem quite comfortable with that arrangement. I think we'd all love to not be in this position, but we're doing the best we can at this point. On the vaccine mandate front, it appears as though we've been able to work through the public safety mandate. I say public safety, the medical staff mandate, if you will. Though my hunch is that kind of these mandates are closing in around us from all sorts of directions. The president issued a fairly sweeping mandate. We're trying to understand whether there's any implications that appears to be really focused on private sector and certainly federal employees as well. But there is a requirement for organizations with 100 more employees, and certainly we have that many. It's not clear in that directive whether public sector apply as well. So we're trying to understand that, but it does seem to me that those mandates from all sorts of angles are coming at us. So we continue to monitor, and I'll certainly advise you accordingly as we go forward. On the police chief front, we have closed the position. This is just a reminder, the second time we've gone out seeking candidates. Interestingly, we have just about the same number of candidates, 13 this time. I will say that we're likely to interview about 6 of them, so about half of them. I think that is a good indication of the quality of our candidates, which is very encouraging. A lot of new faces and some hopefully fresh ideas. So I intend to follow a similar process and use the same panel as we did first time. We kind of debriefed on that and think that was fairly thorough, and I think that's good for comparative purposes as well. So I expect by the middle of the month in October, certainly by the end of October, I'll be in a position to announce the hiring of a new police chief. In terms of election, the ballot is set. Council's certainly aware of that, taking action at your last meeting. The ballot obviously will have the local races for town council, board of education, and sanitary district. And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but for town council, certainly we have 3 candidates for 3 open seats. Board of Education, I believe there are 4 candidates for 3 seats, so there's a contested race there. And I believe for sanitary district, there's 2 candidates for 2 seats. And there's 2 local referendum issues as well, both bond matters. I would note the bi-monthly or bi-weekly e-newsletter came out today, and there's a fairly thorough review of the ballot and the referendum questions if anyone wants to know more details. I also met with council leadership just before this meeting. We are trying to get the Board of Education, or at least someone from the staff of the school, to give a quick update on the turf track project, probably at your next meeting.
Mhm.
I think they have shown an interest in keeping the full council abreast of their activities and kind of their work, and certainly the public. So more to come on that. Some of the details on election, just to be aware of, we start absentee voting on October 4th. We'll be doing that in Chambers B. And so Tody and her election staff will have kind of the use of that Chamber B for the duration, essentially the month of October. And we'll work around that. I think that should not be a problem for council proceedings, your regular meetings in the interim. They have scheduled candidates night. It will be a virtual experience, and that's on September 30th. Candidates night is sponsored by the Scarborough Community Chamber, and I believe Kevin Friedman has agreed to moderate that event again this year. And lastly, of course, election day is on November 2nd at the high school, and there'll be more details to follow as that date gets closer. An update on Alder Hall. The council will recall, and for the public's benefit, the council did approve the purchase of the former Grange Hall, and more recently a Masonic lodge last spring. As part of that approval, they also authorized certain improvements to kind of secure the structure. And I'm pleased to report we've completed all of those improvements. They included some masonry repair, some soffit and fascia, and a full roof replacement. So everything's secure. I feel good that we've been able to do that in time for the winter. The next matter, and we actually have a tour this Friday with folks on staff to really understand any fire safety issues, depending on what occupancy we might consider, and also handicap accessibility issues. And those in large part will determine how we can use that space. So I think within the month or so, I'll be reporting back to you what our recommendations are in terms of how best to use that space, at least in the near term. Depending on upgrades that we may wish to make, that would be a budget consideration next spring. So I don't want to lose sight of this resource that we have for the community and finding ways to open the doors. A reminder for future workshops, these are for your October meetings. I think the council chair's report provided some update. We'd like to flip those two. So the October 6th meeting, your next council meeting, we'll have a TIF workshop. This will be an outgrowth from the discussion that the Finance Committee started with, but it will really be kind of accelerated beyond some of the basics. And to that end, I would recommend that council members view the last Finance Committee meeting, and we can certainly send a link if you'd like to. There was a pretty thorough review at that discussion. And to really be efficient with your time, we'd like to get kind of in the meat of the discussion in terms of how we can be more strategic in terms of maximizing the shelter benefits and financial aspects to the town's benefit. And then on October 20th, we do anticipate the downtown committee report will be ready and available, and they'd like to present that officially in some sort of workshop format. I'll let Councilors Anderson or Clucci speak to the particulars there, but it appears as the committee has done its work at this point. The drafting is underway, and they'll be circulating a draft for comment. If there are issues of substance, I think they're prepared to reconvene. But that's how they kind of left things last night. And lastly, I'm pleased to report to the public, I did to the council earlier today, that as part of the growth management ordinance, one of the last changes, I'll say, to that ordinance was the addition of some public reporting requirements. And we've been a bit lax, but we've had the spreadsheet for some time and need a little nudge. And thank you, Councilor Johnson. We did go live with that spreadsheet today. And I do have Jay Chase here with me this evening, and I'd like you to indulge us just for a moment. Jay is just going to take a moment to actually pull that up and provide a little orientation, if you will. And we freely admit this is a work in progress. It's kind of our first pass. This does meet all the technical requirements, if you will, of the ordinance. That's not to say it serves all the purposes, and we're pleased to modify as that might be helpful. So, Council Chair, if you could pull in Jay,
Yep.
that'd be great.
I think Jay's in here. Jay, can you hear me?
And as Jay's coming in here, I'll just mention, this is a live document. It's actually a Google Sheet. And so as the administrative staff updates that document for their own normal purposes, it will automatically populate. So it's real-time data.
So
Jay, can you hear me?
I can you hear me at this point?
Yep. Hey, Jay, can I actually control it? That way they can see the steps I take to actually get to it through the website. Is that cool?
That would be fine. I will do my best to try to see what's happening behind you so I can speak to it.
Can you see my screen?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go to scarboroughmaine.org. And where am I going to find it? Walk us through.
If you go under departments, top, yep.
Yep.
Code and planning, planning and code.
Planning and code.
Yep. And then over on the right-hand side, there's some blue tabs,
Yep.
residential permit report. And there you go. Click that.
Just 4 clicks of the button.
Simple, right?
Yeah. All right, you speak, I'll navigate.
Sure. So let's see. So yeah, as Tom mentioned, as part of the new GMO that was adopted in June, there's some reporting that's required on the permits. And when I say permits, I'm now talking both about growth permits and building permits, because if you'll recall, I'm sure council does, but for the public, that a number of permits were actually exempted from, or I'm sorry, I should say unit types are exempted from having to get growth permits. So if we look over under column, I'll skip the first couple columns, which are sort of, just basic information in terms of permit number, owner, the location, what type of permit, what subdivision it's in. Under H and I really are where I'm going to start talking here, which identify which of the units require getting a growth permit. So you can see, you'll see a number 1 under H, and then under I, we've provided what type of exemption they fell under. And you'll actually see at the bottom of your screen, or another tab to the exemption key. So if you're interested in why they were exempt, what E6G, I'm sorry, means, it means it was a crossroads plan development unit. So you can understand how the exemption came to be. So that's H and I. Under J, this also just sort of offers a little bit more in terms of the permit type and a little more explanation about what the exemption means as well. K, this was one of the big ones that we know folks were interested in, is actually how many dwelling units were created. Because as folks will recall, part of the discussion early on with the repeal and replace of the growth management ordinance was there's some confusion between the number of growth permits that were issued in a given year and the number of dwelling units. So this will clearly tell you how many dwelling units are created in a given year. Down at the bottom, I believe I did a total tally. If you go down, yep. So I've done a total tally of growth permits, of dwelling units, and total bedrooms. And I actually have a tab that we'll get to as we scroll to the right on the screen that brings those numbers up. So if we could go back to the top, let's see. So we just covered, what did we just cover? Dwelling units. So L tells us what type of dwelling unit it is. You can see, the first couple of permits that were pulled were apartments, and on down the line, there's been condos, single families, and then I think when we get down to the bottom, there's been a few townhouses. The other item that we're to track is the actual number of bedrooms that are created, because I think the interest is, well, if we have an apartment building, is it a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom? And so you'll see M here gives us the number of bedrooms, not only in the apartments, but also the single family homes, because the ordinance doesn't really clarify, what it's looking for in terms any differential between single family and multifamily. That might be something we can parse the data as we go forward. column N gives us whether the permit is in a growth area or not, and that's as defined by our comprehensive plan. Then as we get into O and P, these are so every growth permit or permit gets turned into a building permit. So you have the permit number, the date that it was, the date the building permit was issued, and sort of new in this process is tracking when the units get occupancy. Usually takes some time for a unit to start construction and be completed. So you'll see there's probably a lot of blanks in that column right now that will fill in the coming months. And if we go just a little further to the right, this is where we start to provide the totals. And so you can see essentially, with the new GMO coming in place, there were 48 growth permits, just standard growth permits available. Of those, 25 have been applied for, and there's 23 remaining. I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. I'll circle back to that. But then the next box underneath, this gets to some of the issues that are really called out for, and those totals I was talking about earlier down at the bottom of the columns. I pulled those out over here. So you can see we have a total number of units that require growth permits for 25. Total units that have been permitted through exemptions are 43, for a total of 68 dwelling units and 154 bedrooms. And then the column below that tracks the exemptions. There are a few exemptions that that run out, if you will, that there's a pool that gets depleted. There's within the Crossroads Plan Development District, think the Downs, it's essentially, there's 104 exemptions that are allowed in there, and that expires on December 31st of this year. So there's 78 remaining. And then one bedroom multifamilies outside of the Crossroads district, there's 70 that can be pulled that are exempt from having to get growth permits. That expires in December of 23. 15 of those have been pulled, 55 remaining. And then you'll see one of the other exemptions that council added was that there's going to be 5 additional permits available for non-subdivision single families. And so far we've applied, folks have applied for 2 of those. One of the things that we sort of thought might happen, if we scroll back over to the left, we're going to see the word void under column, let me see if I can find it. Looks like column G. If you scroll up and down, you'll come across there we go. So what sort of as anticipated, because we ran out of permits, so quickly in January, previous to the repeal and replace, we thought that a number of folks might also have concerns that, there wouldn't be permits available. So we note that there were a number of folks who did pull permits. So initially all 48 permits were taken up. However, a number of those have been voided. I think there's, maybe 20 or so. If you sort of scroll up and down, I didn't tally up that number, but there's quite a few that have been voided because the developers decided that they actually weren't going to be able to execute those in the time frame needed. So they will presumably come in at a future date. As of right now, we still have 23 permits available under the growth permit allocation. So I guess with that, I'd open it for questions. As Tom said, this is our first crack at it. Robin Doms from my office, I have to give her, a large bit of the credit for putting this all together and staying on top of tracking all of these bits of information for us.
Thank you, sir. Before we throw it back to Tom, any questions or comments for Jay? Councilor Johnson?
Great job, by the way.
Put your mic on, Councilor Johnson.
Good work, great job. Thank you. Thank you, Jay, especially for the explanation. Just a suggestion, I know this is a work in progress. I think it's a great start.
where I work, we're driven by spreadsheets. And what we have found over time is we have a constant tab in every spreadsheet and it says, read me. And in that read me, it just gives a definition of what you had just done for us, which would be great for the public. That's just a thought. I just noticed in P and O, the actual dates, when do they get counted as allocated or used after the date they actually pull the permit? Is that what it is?
So let's see. So P is the building permit date. So one of the complicating factors that we're still working through as we
Yep.
transition things, we sort of keep in our department, we keep talking about we can't wait till January 1 of 22 because a lot of things sort of simplify for our world. But in this instance, as I recall it, and again, these 48 permits that became available as of June
1. Yep.
1 were first eligible to folks who were already on the waiting list who missed out on the 135 of the
Right.
annual allocation of the previous GMO.
Right.
We enabled those folks because under the previous version of the GMO, one could buy a growth permit and they had 6 months to activate that into a building permit, which is really, I think, one of the nice loopholes or administrative sort of, I don't know, oddities, I guess I call it, that the new GMO sort of cleans up. In the new GMO, a growth permit and a building permit are issued on the same date. However, for these 48 permits, we gave that, we maintained that 6-month window with the recognition that there might have been many folks who, as of February 1st, let's say, said, oh gosh, I'm on the wait list until 2022. I'm going to stop my architect from doing any work or not really be prepared. And then as council did your due diligence and work through the update of the ordinance, we didn't want to catch people flat who are sitting on that list, but also recognizing that there was an interest by council of being sure we activated these permits as quickly as we could. So folks were given that additional, they were actually given a 90-day window till I believe it was August 29th or something like that to basically make a firm commit date. And I think that's where you
Okay.
saw a number of these void ones come up, because I think people realized once we got close to that date, they were not going to be ready to move. And frankly, they said to us, we don't want to move until 2022 anyway, so I'll just give up my permit.
Okay.
So we had weeks, months of email communication with all the different developers and people sitting on the wait list, really trying to figure out, what do you want to do? How are we going to move forward? Because again, we know the interest of council, as stated through the process, was to be sure that those who want to move forward this year with these 48 additional permits are able to, and that folks don't wind up sitting on them and prohibiting, sort of the single homeowner from being able to move forward.
That's good. Thanks for that. So I'm kind of looking at like all those void as almost an example of some of the perceived hoarding that was taking on before the new GMO. And people say, now I got to use it in 90 days. So yeah, I'm going to void them. So that's actually was one of the objectives of the new GMO, was to put a break on the hoarding. So that's a plus. Thanks an awful lot. Like I said, think it's a great job. It needs a little work, but we'll do that over time slowly. Thank you.
Any others? Council Hamel?
Yeah, Jay, I wanted to, repeat the congratulations on getting this data in one place. So it's a key tool for us. I know it's a ton of work that you and the others have gone through in terms of, not only revising the GMO, but trying to find a way to, capture it and express it. But so one thing I'm struggling with though here is that so if the state requires us to do at least 144 units a year, can you project, and this is data as of June, with the information that you have here, can you give us an idea of, how close we're going to come to that, or how far over we're going to be by the data that you have now?
Well, I think this data is specific for, we're in this weird, awkward 6-month period. We're going off a 48 unit pool right now because we're in that 6-month period. So that 144 won't start till January 1st.
Okay,
So I think that's why this is a little bit awkward, as was the GMO for the 6-month period.
I
Yep.
see. Yeah. So we're out of cycle and won't really be on cycle. until
Exactly.
next
This
year.
is like an audit, right? Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So I just would say in
I
general.
was just saving us time, Jay, because I thought that was a 7-minute answer on your end. So.
And it was a 7-second answer. But what I'd like to say is that I just think that this is a work in progress. I think that we're all going to be paying a lot of attention to this. Growth and development, obviously a big issue, but to the extent that you can help, leadership understand it and be able to convey it to others, and to make sure we have common mutual understanding ourselves as a body, that would be very helpful. So I just ask you to kind of keep that in mind, and also, request for Tom to help us in a similar fashion. So thanks.
Councilor Cucci?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for putting it together. I think it's a great start. When you make your data real, a lot of times there's nuances that you don't understand when you're looking at a PowerPoint presentation. And I think this is going to help us understand some of the nuances and details much better as we go on. It's going to be a valuable source down the line. So I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Thank you. Any others? No, Jay, this is just my feedback. I think this might be the totals column might be your publicly facing, the most prominent thing for people, so they can quickly glance to see the state of our GMO, so to speak. And then the deeper dive might be the spreadsheet that we're looking at. But that's just my personal feedback, and maybe freeze the first 2 columns. That way, when you're scrolling over, you can keep knowing what property you're looking at as you keep scrolling over. So those are probably committee work suggestions, but I'll just throw them out right now. So, yep.
Thank you. I've been thinking about maybe just try and create a dashboard with those totals that. when
Right,
you flash
exactly,
down, that-
right.
That's the first thing you see, but.
Yes,
yeah,
because Joe Schmo, Joe developer, Joe everybody just wants to quickly see the state of the GMO. And I think that's what we're trying to do. So
Yep.
I try to freeze these myself, but then realized I don't own this thing, so it wouldn't let me. But any other questions for Jay? Jay, thank you. I think this is very helpful. It's nice to be able to answer the question of how many of those 1-bedroom units have been used, and they're sitting right here, so we can actually see them, which is 15 of them, which is good. And I believe the beacon coming down the pipeline is going to be asking for 24 of those. So now we can simply say it to anybody that asks us. So perfect. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
With that, I'll just quickly, any questions for Tom Hall presentation? No? Okay. With that, I will go over to non-action items. We do have one non-action item today. We have Tracy, I believe it's Shekel. She is from Otelco, did I say that right? Otelco, excuse me. They are in the process of building 19 miles of fiber for the town of Scarborough that will hit about 1,600 locations. But I'm going to let Tracy say all those things. So Tracy, I believe you have if you have a presentation, Tracy, do you have a presentation?
I do.
Okay, I'm going to move you in as a panelist. That way you can share it. Okay. Okay, you are in, so you should be able to share a screen. If you can't, let me know.
Well, let's see. Can everybody see it?
You can see it.
Sweet. I love when technology does what it's supposed to do. Hi, everybody. Yes, we are building about 1,600 locations. I just want to give you a bit of an overview. This way, when constituents see trucks in the field and they call, you'll actually know what's going on, because I know how uncomfortable it can be when you don't. First, a little bit of background about Otelco. We are actually the DBA for 3 legacy phone companies in Maine that have evolved over the last 100 years ago. In the Scarborough area, we were Saco River Telephone. As you get into northern Cumberland County, we were Pine Tree Telephone. In mid-Maine Communications Services, a couple of footprints in and around Bangor. And over the years, this is the conglomeration of names that has landed on Otelco. So at least you know who we are. I want to do a brief, what I call Fiber 101. And if this is overkill and you guys are like, nope, we know all this, then give me a shout and I'll stop. But what we find is that people sometimes don't understand the difference in the technology. So copper and coaxial cable are what internet is mostly delivered by today, where fiber hasn't been built. And that copper, both technologies are really based on copper and electrical signals. And the copper has resistance. So the further away from a regeneration point somebody is, the worse the signal is. And it doesn't allow for symmetrical speeds, which have become really important since everybody in the world is doing what we are right now with this two-way video communication. So with fiber, symmetrical speeds are easily attainable. There's a whole lot less resistance, so the signal carries a lot further and a lot stronger. And the data that can be carried is tremendous. Right now, we're offering service that ranges from 150 megabits symmetrical to up to a gigabit. And the beauty of fiber is that it is pretty much, we don't even know what its capabilities are. So as far as expandable and future-proof, it is the number, it's the ticket. Like I said, symmetrical speeds up until pretty much COVID, most of us were just consumers on the internet, and the download speed was what we really needed. Upload, you know, you might send an email, you might send pictures to somebody, but with video conferencing and kids studying, schooling from home, that upload speed has become significantly more important. And so a lot of people who felt that they had adequate internet before all this are finding now that it's not quite so adequate because there's no upload speed to accommodate what we're doing. So what's the plan? 1,600 locations. We're already in the make ready, get attachments on the poles stages of it. We expect service to be ready in early winter. And honestly, we're building in 2 different states right now, and we're finding that supply chain issues are happening in some places. We're building in the South, and so a lot of our contractors have been deployed to go kind of pick up the pieces from Hurricane Ida. So there's things that are coming into play that may change our schedule a little bit, but ultimately the plan is to be ready to start installing by February or so. As I said, we're offering 150, 500, and gigabit speeds. Here is a map of the areas, the blue. Can everybody see that okay? I don't know how big your screen, I guess it's pretty big, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty big. Yep.
The blue area is the approximate build area. Sometimes once we get in the field, there's things that cause us to change things by a little bit, but this is what the current plan looks like. And there's information on our website at otelco.com builds. We also have a form that people can fill out for what we're calling priority installation. So as soon as we know an area is going to be ready to light and make live, anybody who signs on to this priority installation will get an immediate call to say we're ready to install. And so it'll put them ahead of, you know, waiting for the postcards to show up that we'll be sending or whatever. And that's about it. The rest of the 10 minutes, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Councilor Johnson?
Yes, I've been waiting for this, but I still don't quite understand it. When I see on your slide, you said 1,600 locations. What is a location? That's not 1,600 homes, right? That's 1,600 points of entry, like a neighborhood road or something. What is 1,600?
No, that's
locations?
essentially a home or a business.
Okay. So you're doing 1,600 in the town of Scarborough?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you have 1,600 accounts or that it's just going to be available to 1,600 people?
It'll be available to 1,600 people.
I gotcha. So you guys are trying to break through, you're trying to get turf in here essentially.
Tracy, if I could, this is Tom Hall. Can you go back to the slide with the map? And
Sure. We're
so-
providing choices. That's what we're doing.
so
Yes, of course.
how was the service area, how was this blue kind of service area determined? Was that done through market research and what?
There's a couple of factors that rise to the top when we decide where we're going to build. One of them is density per mile, because in an area like Scarborough, where we have no access to the poles, like in our existing footprints, it's a little less expensive to build fiber infrastructure because we're already on the poles. Outside of our footprints in towns like Scarborough and Cumberland and the other places we're building, we're looking at construction costs of somewhere, depending on the condition of the poles, between $45,000 and $60,000 a mile. So the first thing we look at is the number of homes within that mile that we can serve, and we look for a density in the anywhere from 75 to 100 per mile. So that's one factor. And then the other factor is access to the poles. We tend to stay away from underground utilities because we don't know that the conduit is there, or if there's room, or if we're allowed to be there. And constructing underground is almost twice the cost of going on poles. So that's the other factor that kind of helps us determine where to build. And from what I hear talking to our engineering department about Scarborough, another piece in helping us decide was the fact that there were a lot of poles that we would have been happy to go on, but they were in need of repair or replacement that would have, the onus would have been on us instead of the pole owner, which would have again made it cost prohibitive to attach to those poles.
So just for, the audio is not going to be good, but just for the council's benefit, it appears the whole Maple Avenue, Elmwood, kind of across the Meadow campus, across Gorham Road, Sawyer Road is here. So it kind of picks up the municipal campus. Or this is the Parkway, so this would be the Scarborough Downs property. And then down below here, it looks like down Black Point Road, kind of either side, and down Winnick's Neck Road, if you will. It's kind of the roughly the bounds of the service area.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Councilor Katarina?
Tracy, thank you for this, and I'm glad to see this is coming into Scarborough. I'm really sorry to see that you aren't going anywhere on the other side of the turnpike where I live, and some other people live on the council, where we really need this, so, you know.
Well, one of the things that I can't guarantee anything, but one of the things that we're doing as we're building is kind of a crowdsourcing kind of thing. So if you go to the website, and I'll go back to that page so that the URL is there, people can go and see what the availability from our perspective is in their area. If service is not available there, we're encouraging people to fill out the form anyway, because in areas where the density may not be high enough, or maybe it's too costly to get across the turnpike, or whatever the circumstance is, if we see an uprise in interest in an area that looks like it'll make the numbers work for us, we'll explore building there. So tell us you want it, and maybe we will come.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tracy, this is Tom Hall again. Just a question, and forgive me for not knowing at all the answer, but is this involving any of the ARPA funds, federal monies that have been made available? Is that what is?
This is a private investment on our part. If municipalities can use those ARPA funds, I'm assuming, I'm still trying to figure out what you're allowed to use them for and what you're not allowed to use them for, but we have been approached by other towns to say, you know, if we decided we wanted to put some funding toward this, could you extend the build? And the answer has been, we can certainly talk about it, but our build schedule, as much as it's a moving target because of the factors we can't control, is pretty much a a well choreographed ballet. So we're scheduled building through the middle of 2023. So even if Scarborough or Yarmouth or whoever said, you know, we're going to pay you to build the rest, it wouldn't happen until the end of the current schedule that we're in.
Yeah, so I just think it's important for the council and for the public to appreciate this is a business venture. They've seen an area that there seems to be an business opportunity. That's not to say there are detailed discussions at the state, county, and I think we can have them at the local level about expanding broadband ourselves over and above this investment. So all is not lost. And I think a lot of that focus, given a state like Maine, the numbers financially just don't work. There's not the density to kind of make the business case. But I think there's a high public policy objective here statewide. So
Well, and there is definitely an opportunity for collaboration down the road if the town so chooses to. We're happy to talk about that, to help, you know, subsidize our investment, if you will, to make it, to allow us to go further. It's not something that's off the table where we're concerned.
Good. Any others? Tracy, thanks for joining us. Very informative. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay, with that, we are on to new business, which is order number 21080. It's the first reading and schedule a public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendments to chapter 1301, the general assistance ordinance pursuant to title 22 MRSA 43054. And does Liam tee this up, Tom?
sure.
Okay, Liam, you want to introduce this
Make
for
him
us?
earn his money tonight.
About time.
Thank you, Tom and the rest of the group. So this is sort of an annual rite of passage. Every year, DHHS increases or revises their GA maximums and subtle changes to the MMA model ordinance. So this is the GA maximums is just it's an obligation. There's no ability to, outside of increasing, there's no obligation or no ability to decrease those maximums. So it's just a kind of a standard process we do every year.
Thanks, sir. Any questions for Liam? No? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Tony?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Just call me Counselor Katerina. Order number
Oh, geez,
21081 is the first reading and scheduled a public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendment to chapter 302A, the committee board manual, by adding quote, broadcasting of meetings. Liam?
Well, just to give some background on this, this was a suggestion that was brought forward through rules and policies late last spring by former Councilor Gleistein, really to require, as we kind of prepared for moving past the pandemic, which we obviously haven't done yet, and the ability to record and broadcast all of our proceedings and subcommittees and committees over Zoom and subsequently YouTube, really an interest in requiring certain boards and committees to broadcast their proceedings. And of the three proposed here to codify within 302A, Longrange Planning, I believe, was the only entity or municipal body that was not doing that routinely. So we're looking to codify with this proposed change the requirement that Zoning Board of Appeals, Planning Board, and Long Range Planning Committee broadcast their proceedings for archival purposes.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Liam? Counselor Katerina?
Yeah, Liam, just out of curiosity, I know that the various committees, including Long Range Planning, have passed those motions, those rules to broadcast and to use Zoom and whatever. Is this redundant now, or is this separate? And if you could explain that so the public will understand that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the policies that through a state law change that require or that allow for hybrid meeting. So this would be remote participation of members. Again, that was never previously allowed for. Is obviously something that we wanted to see continue. Again, in the instance, again, I think we had a counselor a few years ago who flew back from a European vacation to participate and then flew back to their vacation. By having this policy, that would allow for participation of that member without having to make the travel. So that was sort of one important piece. I think the more important piece, or that was an important piece. I think the more important piece was the hybrid meeting policy really allowed for, again, this broadcast and public participation remotely, which I think everyone has seen the value and benefit of. So this is really the broadcast for record keeping purposes. I would argue the hybrid meeting policy was for those other purposes.
Keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just follow up with that, but are we recording when we do these hybrid meetings and they're going out on YouTube, aren't they available as recordings to archive?
They are, yep, but they are, but the hybrid meeting policy was required to be passed by the committees.
Right.
Just because we allow for that the hybrid meeting doesn't mean that we have to archive it. I think what we're suggesting with this rule change, this 302A, is that we are going to archive it.
So
the
this
hybrid
just-
meeting policy does not require that. This would.
Okay, so this just hammers that down, so to speak.
The same platforms that we're using, but it's for different purposes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any others?
Just by way of introduction, I would just further mention, this got a lot of airtime and discussion at the Charter Review Committee. And part of the reason that I think the issue hasn't come back up until now is that process, by our own choice, we've chosen to kind of delay that, kind of digging into those details. So there has been a lot of discussion, right up through the completion of that process, along with the Rules and Policies Committee discussion.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
No, I have a clarity question, please, because now I'm confused, and I think people are still confused, conflating two different things, which is number one, a remote policy that we have for committees and boards. That's to allow board members to engage in the meeting remotely versus a recording, a live stream recording of the meeting in general. Because theoretically, if everybody is at the board, based on that other policy, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't need Zoom, because nobody needs to Zoom in. They're all there. So this doesn't nail it home. This guarantees that certain meetings are live streamed and recorded. So folks get confused. Am I still confused, or do I have it right, Don?
I'm just having Tony pull up the policy, but I believe you are correct. The state law that enabled and requires these local policies to be considered and passed by each committee speaks to the remote participation aspects.
Okay.
It is, I believe, silent from a statutory point of view on the broadcast requirement. I think our policy does have some passing reference or preference in that regard, but it does not require it. And that's the difference here.
I have one more addition to that. So maybe I'm operating in a different world, but I thought that part of why we did this policy with the various committees is so that we can encourage greater public participation also. So therefore, we're going to make sure we have hybrid availability so that the public they don't have to come to town hall to weigh in. Am I missing something here? Or is that something that needs to be added?
Can I take a stab at this? Our current hybrid policy requires this Zoom meeting exactly the way we're doing it.
Right.
It does not require that I click live stream to YouTube. So what this proposal does is it forces me under our new policy, this policy, to click the live stream to YouTube.
Maybe we should be doing that with all committees, not
That, I
just
think
these
that,
ones.
and I think that's something let's put on the floor and discuss that. I totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah. So do you have a question, or you want to wait till we
No,
discuss it?
that's-
Okay. Do you have a question for Liam?
No.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, let's discuss it.
The only point I was going to make on discussion and on, not to get off topic here, is that there was considerable discussion and some input about how this should apply to other council committees and subcommittees. And I think that's the point that Councilor Johnson was raising. So
I believe we plan to take that up in a separate fashion, but I want to make sure we don't lose sight of that. But I do not want to, impede our going ahead and voting on this as it stands. Councilor Coogee?
Yeah, I think this is a nice small step. We have spent a lot of time talking about it in rules and policy over a year ago, and it was part of the charter where, I think before we leap right in and incorporate some of this stuff into the charter, I think it makes sense. Why don't we make a policy and test drive it for a while to see what we might not be thinking of? And then maybe expand it to other committees. But I think for these that are listed here, it makes perfect sense.
Councilor Caterina?
And I would agree with that. I was just opening that door because I think the public has gotten so used to being able to participate and watch and see, live. I mean, it's always been on public, well, not always, but on public TV, whatever station that is now. But to me, the more public participation we can get, the better. So yes, I'm all for passing this tonight, but I'd love to see us look at what should we be doing? What are we doing? What can we be doing to increase that? The public, so.
Councilor Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good start. I think we're still kind of working through the whole hybrid thing. So to try and do too much too quick might be challenging. I think we definitely keep the other committees on the radar for whether or not we want to pursue. But just speaking for myself, coming onto the council, there was a lot of stuff, especially the past year, where we would refer a lot to the Long Range Planning Committee, but we didn't have the archive that I think would have been helpful for me as a new counselor, for probably those of us to look back in the past. And given the scope of what they do, the influence of that committee, their charge that they're in the charter, I think just, bringing it along with the rest of the other committees that are in there, to me makes sense, at least as a first step. And that's kind of what we deliberated back in the Rules and Policy Committee meeting, a couple months ago. Like, this is just a good step in the right direction to make sure that that information's archived appropriately.
Good. Any others? Yeah, just personally, I requested this be on the agenda simply, with the downs coming up, and there's going to be lots of discussion. I'm sure we're going to refer to the Long Range Planning Committee. And it was simply just a reaction to, hey, let's have that archive sooner rather than later. And of course, we can hammer out some of the other details for the quote lesser committees down the line, but at least we can all rest assured, if you're mentioned in the charter, you're going to be broadcast and archived. So any other comments? No? Okay, Tony?
Councilor Pucci?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson?
Yes.
Councilor Caterina?
Yes.
Councilor Johnson?
Yeah.
Councilor Hamel?
Yes.
Chairman Johnson?
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Order number 21082 is the act on the request from the town manager to authorize payment of premium pay to the firefighters, EMS personnel from the ARPA funds. And Liam, I think you're going again, correct?
I am.
Yep.
So the action before the council this evening is to essentially awards or recognize the efforts of our call and per diem fire personnel. As you recall, we've already awarded through the settlement of our 3 collective bargaining agreements, public safety collective bargaining agreements, ARPA payments retroactive to the start of the pandemic through essentially the end of the official state of emergency pandemic. So these personnel that we're asking for some consideration for are, again, these are our call company employees and our per diem firefighters. So they're very much an integral part of our whole fire EMS crew. They don't serve as primary EMS responders, but they frequently do respond to EMS calls as well as any other sort of fire or motor vehicle accidents, things of that nature. That just to give an appreciation for the scope, in terms of employees, we have approximately 116 employees who would benefit from this if it's approved. And we've earmarked essentially a 50 cents per hour premium pay for those hours worked during that period of time. The bonuses, if you want to characterize them as such, would range anywhere from $2. Again, that would be someone who just worked 4 hours during that period, all the way up to about almost just shy of $1,800 for the person who worked the most hours during that period. And the total fiscal impact is projected to be $43,075.
Liam, could you just quickly, I think when people hear per diem, they think of somebody that doesn't work much. Can you just speak specifically? I know we have some per diem people that work pretty much full time. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so as you know, we have a number of stations in the town of Scarborough, and we have full-time personnel on 2 of those stations. So the remainder of those stations are staffed with regular shifts. So these are people who work anywhere from, a shift a month to 2 full 24-hour shifts a week. So quite a few hours are being worked. Oftentimes these are people who are professional firefighters in other communities, but these are people who you wouldn't know the difference really. If you had a serious scene, they look the same as our full-time firefighters in many respects. They respond to many of the similar calls, and they're just a huge part to how we staff a town of Scarborough size with, in the grand scheme of things, a fairly limited full-time personnel of 8 people per shift. At any one time, we could have upwards of 16 or 18 people on duty, depending on the day or night, and the rest of those are per diem personnel. So we still rely pretty heavily on our per diem program. I think we're the first in the state to have it, and I think that they're very deserving of some consideration in this regard.
Thank you. Any other questions for Liam before we move on? Jean Marie?
Yeah, Liam, out of curiosity, since I come from a long line of on-call firefighters, how many on-call people are there? Do we even have that anymore? I mean, I haven't heard much about it. My husband retired from it, so I don't know.
We do. So we did do a bit of reorganization. I apologize to Chief Thurlow if I err in my characterization, but we did look to consolidate the number of our traditional fire companies. We still have a very active call company. It's not what it once was, but we still count probably upwards of 60 or 70 with some fairly regular participation. Again, there are some folks who not only sit on call companies, but also are part of our per diem ranks. The obligation is residency within a mile of the border of Scarborough. So it's still very much a volunteer in spirit company, but they in terms of actual numbers, I probably couldn't ramble that off the top of my head, but still quite active.
Thank you.
Okay. Any others? Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Counselor Johnson?
No discussion, just, I think it's money well spent and money well deserved. And no escalation on next year on COLA or stipend or anything. I tell you, in my ride with the police that one night, when you see the personal interaction all day long that the police have to have with the public, the police and the fire and the EMS with the fire, and you don't know what's on the other side of the conversation. Are they wearing a mask? Are they sober or anything? These guys, they really went out there and blazed this during COVID. So again, money well deserved and money well spent. Thank you.
Any others? Okay, Tony?
Counselor Tucci?
Yes.
Counselor Anderson?
Yes.
Counselor Katarina?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson?
Yes.
Counselor Hamel?
Yes.
And Chairman Johnson?
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Good. Item number 10 is standing and special committee reports, liaisons, and raise your hand if you have one. Counselor Anderson?
Yeah, so the Rules and Policy Committee met last week and we talked a lot about the town valuation estimation policy for budget. We had a really good conversation. I think we'll have something soon for the council to react to. We did go on many tangents in that conversation, which was really good. I think a lot of those conversations will continue probably with the council and the finance committee. Just a lot of really exciting, interesting stuff coming our way, I think, as we alluded to with the TIF and everything that we can do, that's just kind of opening a lot of doors. So really exciting stuff. At the next one, we're gonna revisit that policy and also potentially take up revisiting the agenda for the council meeting. So if anybody has any thoughts about the agendas today that they want to share prior to, just feel free to share those. I think that's all I have.
Counselor Katarina?
Yeah, long-range planning, our regular meeting, basically we talked about there's a potential conversion of short-term hotel, I don't know what you want to call it, down, and I'm looking at Tom, what's the name of the hotel? Yes, thank you, the Roundwood, yeah.
The extended stay is its current status.
Yeah. And what they were doing was they were just floating the potential of converting this hotel motel to housing, apartments, not condos, but to apartments. And it was a good conversation. There's a lot of work that would have to be done with it. Me, Ms. Affordable Workforce Housing. I made them sharpen their pencils and come back with some better numbers. But stay tuned. It's long, it's way out there. This is just the beginnings of that. So, and then tomorrow is ordinance at 4 o'clock. I believe we are planning to be here in person, the members of ordinance. Which was and we will, we're going to be resurrecting 5G, dusting it off. I will tell folks that we aren't looking to relitigate the whole thing, but we do need to see where did we leave it, and where do we want to go, and then also the for lack of a better word, the trailer park definition and whatever. I know in our ordinance, the town attorney will be with us, so this will be a good chance for us to just have a discussion. Where are we going to go with these things? What can we do, not do? So stay tuned.
Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, we are going to have a finance committee meeting next Wednesday. And we're going to continue the discussion that we started the last meeting on capital reserve funding. Also going to go through some of the assessors, some of the work that the assessor provided to us. We provide a summary to the state every year of our taxable values. There's some neat information there that I thought would be helpful for us to review, including a summary of our TIFs and CEAs. So that'll be next Wednesday at 4.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Yeah, just to report that the communication committee has wrapped up the Scarborough Community Satisfaction Survey, pushed it to the vendor and tell them to make it go live. So and they're going to take about 10 or 12 days to vet it. They have test groups that actually test the survey to make sure things are in line, things aren't confusing, things don't collide with each other. And then we're going to actually get a final copy for maybe a last minute tweak if needed. We don't think we'll need it. And then about a week after that, the mailings should begin. So we'll be communicating that. We're building out a communication plan for the leader and the e-newsletter to alert people to be on the lookout for the survey. So,
Thank you. Councilor Hamel?
Thank you. I had 2 updates. One for appointments and negotiations. We met on Monday, and I have 2 first notice appointments which we're recommending to the council for subsequent review at a second meeting and then a vote. But first, for Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee, appointing Mr. Alfred H. Falzone as the second alternate with a term to expire 2022. And for Transportation Committee, appoint Mr. Craig Robinson as the first alternate with a term to expire in 2023. The second update I had was we met last night in a joint committee meeting, the Shellfish Committee and the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee. Pleased to say that both committees had quorums. We had Ari Leach joining us to review conservation commitments. And basically that after much discussion, when difficulties for several months, both committees unanimously approved the following steps in terms of going forward to improve their attendance. Number one, they want to make sure that they remain as separate committees and that they do not combine. Number two, that they encourage the Appointments and Negotiations Committee to move quickly to fill remaining vacancies. Number three is to make sure that they will continue to meet according to their published schedule of monthly meetings that are back to back on the second Tuesday of each month. And then finally, that they would commit to meet 4 times a year as a joint committee to cover issues in common, and that those joint meetings would check the box for their respective monthly meetings for those months. So, I was encouraged that they kind of came up with this on their own. They seem to be renewed in terms of their enthusiasm and recommitting to the regulatory commitments to do conservation work, including surveys, which will help them determine the number of licenses each year. So very successful. We also in attendance was the Marine Resources Officer, Gene O'Neill, and we're very pleased with that committee coming back to life. Thanks.
Thank you. The only thing I have is in leadership today, I think there's essentially the calendar, there may be one, we're thinking about having a third meeting in October. I think we can all agree it's been a little bit of a lull, but there's also, the pipeline is getting full. So we're thinking third meeting in October, which would be the second Wednesday of October. And that would be for a step 0 workshop on the previously mentioned apartment conversion project that was given at the Long Range Planning Committee update. So I think that the council would be eager to hear about the project firsthand. Again, I think they'd be requesting a contract zone if they went forward. So this is one of those step 0 workshops where it's not part of the official process. They have not actually officially come forward, but we would like to hear about the project. So tentatively 6 o'clock on the second Wednesday in October, which would be between our normal meetings. But I think we can assume probably for October, November, we're probably looking at 3 meetings a month, just because of the stuff that we have coming down the tracks.
Everyone looks excited.
I can see the excitement in all the eyes. With that, are there any councilor comments?
Yes,
Councilor Katarina?
sorry, guys. No, I just have to bring up Beach Ridge Speedway because if I have one more person grab me, call me, email me, whatever, about what's going on with Beach Ridge Speedway, I would just remind people that that is zoned light industrial. So, no, there aren't 8,000 houses going in there. And the Kuzaks, they're private property owners. They have the right to sell their property to a ready, willing, and able buyer. That's part of the American way. And I would tell people to just take a chill pill and see what comes forward. But I can tell you, it's not zoned for housing. So just park that. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Tony?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Yeah.